What's up, fam? Smash the like button for the algorithm and let's get started with the story. The monster with red glowing eyes and sharp teeth was defeated in battle. Misty Flower's team pierced its head with powerful steel. The leader of Misty Flower's team bent down on his knees over the monster, and at that moment, his metal sword stabbed firmly into the creature.
Yunho was the guy's name, and he was a man who lived his whole life for the sake of destroying monsters.
He was also a berserk player. The guy was in one of the 8 black dungeons of the world, and no one but him had ever traveled this far because it was the deepest and darkest place. Yunho fought his battles against the greatest monsters that could not be defeated by everyone, but this guy was a persistent player. Berserk deftly and skillfully wielded his weapon, and his eyes reflected all the emotions and feelings he had towards the monsters. He tightly clutched the sword in his hand and attacked the monsters that were several times taller than him. These creatures were not harmless at all. Player Berserk was very focused because, at that moment, he was thinking only about how he could defeat all these creatures. Yunho had fought these monsters at a rather young age. He was only 32 years old. Unfortunately, each time the guy managed to dodge, it became more and more difficult. The tail of one of the monsters was so large that its appearance alone was terrifying, and it was completely covered with sharp spikes. The guy did not immediately notice this monster, but when he turned his attention to it, he froze for a moment from what he saw and tried to think of his next actions in the shortest possible time. The monster was nimbler and faster and launched its attack on Yunho faster than he expected. The monster had every chance to overpower the guy. Player Berserk, despite his not-so-great position, did not despair and tried to launch his attack on the enormous-sized monster. The monster tried to escape from this attack, and with its tail, it destroyed everything around, leaving only ruins. The guy dodged the shards. The monster began to lose hope but did not give up, trying to strike the player again. It opened its mouth and lunged at him. Yunho, unlike the monster, was focused, and with one deft movement of his sword, while using his strength, he sent the creature flying to the other side. The guy had no time to recover and cope with one monster as he saw that another monster, no smaller in size, was already approaching. The look of that one was also terrifying. Its eyes burned bright red, and just the sight of it could not be tolerated by every person, let alone fight it. Yunho reacted quickly and lunged with his weapon at the monster. While the emotions on his face didn't change, there was still anger and rage. He decided to attack the monster with his sword, but the creature was able to grab the weapon with its jaws, clutching its large teeth tightly together. The monster had such a powerful jaw that it could bite the guy's sword with just one firm squeeze without causing any damage to itself. Yunho was stunned by what he saw and tried to figure out what to do next because he wasn't going to give up. He tried to cope with his own strength and all the experience he had gained in other battles, but the monster's power was too great. The Berserk player was thrown off into the distance by the force of the shockwave, and he managed to stay on his feet with great difficulty. The guy did not give up. On the contrary, he was even more excited by this moment and tried to attack the monster again and again until he won. The two rivals were frozen against each other, and neither was going to give in because they had a lot of persistence. The monster couldn't stand it at first and rushed towards the guy, its eyes filled with anger as it tried to destroy the player with all its strength. Yunho saw the monster's determination and realized that he couldn't delay any longer. He used his strength to wield his weapon. The sight from the outside looked very intimidating, and the force of the blows was incredible. Although the guy was much smaller in size, it did not prevent him from attacking. After a short period of time, Player Berserk managed to make such a powerful attack that the monster had no chance, and the guy's sword pierced the creature, sending it to the other world. After defeating the monster, Yunho was finally able to breathe out and catch his breath, but he didn't plan to stop and was going to move on. While fighting all these monsters, he could not pay attention to what was going on around him, and now what he saw amazed him. He could not believe that his entire Misty Flower team had been destroyed. He looked around again and made a decision to himself that none of this mattered, and he wasn't going to back down from his goals. The guy was even more angry about what had happened, and although he was upset about losing his team, he knew that he would have to deal with it all by himself and destroy the main monster alone. Yunho stuck to his goals and plans and went further until he came to a huge iron wall with an image of some creature on it. The leader of the Misty Flower team, though with great difficulty, managed to boil in front of the battle gate that the guy was waiting ahead. He did not know at all what awaited him. Yunho walked inside the room, trying to find anything and mentally trying to understand and make a plan for what he should do next. He was surrounded by darkness, and although it stirred him from within, he knew for sure that he was moving in the right direction and was confident that the most important monster was definitely here. Although Yunho was looking for the creature he wanted, he still didn't expect the eye of the Darkness Master to appear in front of him in a moment. and it was a very terrifying sight. A bright light pierced through the leader of the Misty Flower team, and it wasn't an ordinary light but an attack on the guy by the main monster itself. The force of the blow from the creature was so powerful that Yunho was thrown a great distance by the shockwave. The berserk player tried to regain consciousness, but it was not easy for him because the attack on him was of the greatest strength. The leader of Team Misty Flower was able to recover a bit and sarcastically laughed as he thought about whether this was the end and if he would be defeated and remain in this place forever. The guy realized that this monster was strong and humanity was now too weak to fight him. He thought that going to the other world in this place was not so bad because it was already the deepest level to which no one had yet reached. Yunho was thinking that he still couldn't believe he had been defeated by a monster. But at that moment, a girl was leaning over him, shouting at him not to dare to give up. The guy recognized Li Wan in this girl and couldn't believe his eyes that she was alive and well. She was trying to help him by using her power at the place where Yunho was injured by the monster. The girl used her power to heal him and was not going to give up, but she also demanded the same from the guy. Yunho didn't understand what Li Wan was doing and told her to leave everything as it was and run away immediately because her safety was much more important to him. The girl was very angry with Yunho and told him to stop saying all this immediately because she would not give up and would try her best to help him. Li Wan realized that the guy's wounds were very serious, and she thought it was a miracle that he was still holding on, but she was still sure that she had to do anything to help him. The girl thought about the miracle, and it dawned on her that she herself should create this miracle so that Li Wan would be able to save the leader of the Misty Flower team. The guy woke up and came to his senses, realizing that this was how it ends, what he devoted his whole life to, namely the destruction of monsters. Yunho remembered everything that had happened to him and had no regrets. If it were possible, he would once again devote his life to it, but he was worried that his partner was all alone. The guy couldn't calm down and couldn't stop thinking about it, but there was nothing left for him but to apologize to his partner if he had ever done something wrong. Yunho never liked to get attached to people, but he was worried about the girl because she had just entered adulthood and had been left alone so quickly. He was grateful to Li Wan for seeing the best in him. Li Wan didn't stop and tried to convey to the guy by shouting that she still wouldn't leave him, even if there was a restriction to return in time. The girl was sure that she absolutely did not care about the price that would need to be paid, and at that moment, her hands were clothed with a golden glow. Li Wan knew for sure that she would save him no matter what, and at that moment, something strange and incomprehensible began to happen near them. A moment later, at the place where Yunho and Li Wan were, there was a huge explosion, and absolutely everything was engulfed in a golden glow. The guy and girl were bent over him, asking Yunho to look at them if he was already awake, but all he saw was not a clear image. It was a bit blurry. After a while, the picture in front of him became clearer, but the people in front of him were happy that he was awake. In front of this guy and girl lay a baby in its crib, who, due to its age, could not even talk yet. The people who were apparently the parents of this child were worried that one of them had probably woken him up, but the child didn't understand what was going on because he had gone to the other world. He thought so because Yunho himself was in the body of this child. The guy who was leaning over the crib, pointing at the girl, said to Yunho that it was his mom, and pointing his finger at himself, said that he was his dad and that dad thought the baby must have woken up to look at him. Yunho reached out his hand and grasped one of his mom's fingers, and even such an action was not the easiest task for him, but he managed. Mom understood what the baby wanted to do, and from such a scene, she smiled because the baby wanted to hold her hand. But the father, at this moment, was a little upset that the baby chose this action and not him. Yunho, who was in the baby's body, realized that this was not another world and that everything happening to him was actually shocking. He could not do anything and could not even move his body normally. He finally realized that he had not gone to the other world but returned to the time when he was only 1 year old. He thought it was all just unreal because it was impossible to rewind time. The guy remembered the last thing that had happened to him and how Li Wan had tried to perform a miracle, and it was this miracle that the girl had activated at the very end, allowing the impossible to happen. Yunho was no longer surprised that Li Wan could reverse time after the moment the girl stood on par with the 12 thrones. The parents at this moment continued to be enthralled with their child. The boy scrutinizing his parents was touched because he could never imagine that he would be able to see the two of them again. Yunho remembered well that his parents had gone to the other world when he was only 6 years old, and they had been destroyed by monsters. It was since then that the boy had despised monsters. After thinking over everything that had happened to him, Yunho realized that he had been given a second chance to make things right, and he vowed that he would do everything he could to ensure the future was changed. The boy, who was the leader of the Misty Flower team, mentally thought it over again and clearly decided for himself that this is how it would be and clenched his fist. But his parents thought this action was cute and wanted to take a picture of it. Yunho was lying on his back and thinking about the fact that even though he was able to retain all of his memories, he was just a child now. The boy knew that this meant only one thing. At that moment, he was completely helpless, and his whole life now consisted only of the fact that he could only eat and sleep. The leader of Team Misty Flower was very grateful for the possibility that he could breathe again, which meant he could at least roll over, which the kid was trying to do at the moment. When Yunho was trying to realize this, a joyful girl stood over him and encouraged him that he would definitely be able to do everything and that he should not stop. Yuna was the name of that crazy girl who was so supportive of the kid, and she was his sister, who was 4 years older. The boy realized that his memory was more vague about his sister than his parents, but he remembered one moment well and in detail. Yunho remembered a fragment from his life when they got into a bad situation with their car. The girl repeated to him only one phrase, that she would never leave him and would always be with him. The boy remembered well that it was the day when the monsters took his family, but Yuna held him very tightly and repeated all the same words. Now his sister was just happy that her little brother had finally managed to roll over, and Yunho had tried to do it not for the first time, but only now had he succeeded. Yuna was very proud that her brother had finally succeeded, and she was just crazy about him. When Yunho was 9 months old, even then mana was everywhere. But even though he didn't have much mana, it was in the air. The guy remembered well that he was always lacking mana, and that's why he had such a hard time dealing with monsters. He knew that now he should definitely take the opportunity to collect it while his body would allow him to do so. The little one never stayed alone for a long time, and it was the same now because his sister Yuna came up to him, very curious about what her little brother was doing. While Yunho was busy trying to gather as much mana as possible, he turned his attention to something interesting related to his sister. He noticed that Yuna was just like a sponge infused with an extraordinary amount of mana. Over this, Yuna really thought about it. Yunho well remembered that when an individual accumulated so much energy within them, it would all end up in pain, which was extremely detrimental to their health. Yuna wanted to help her brother learn how to walk, but at this moment, he was thinking that he should definitely help Yuna learn how to control her mana before anything happened. Yuna was already 4 years old and was happy to be able to walk and talk freely, but she still had a lot to do and was happy to spend more time outdoors. The sister took her brother out for a walk, and only this factor alone lifted the girl's mood, because she was still crazy about her brother. Yuna brought her brother Yunho to meet her friends, and the boys were very happy to see her because they were always happy to see her. Yunho was well aware that, unlike him, his sister was very good at communicating with other people and generally found common ground with everyone who lived in their neighborhood. The boy heard the girl address him, and it was already a rarity because the child himself was not very sociable and more silent. Yunho heard the girl asking him why he came here in the first place, and she didn't like it and didn't really want him here. He explained to the girl, whom he called Dren Mini, that he didn't come here of his own accord. He was brought here by his sister. The girl was even more angry because she had repeatedly warned him not to call her that, to which the guy decided it would be just better to agree with her. The children on the playground asked a woman what they would play today, and she advised them that because they were outnumbered today, they should play cops and bandits. The boy didn't understand why he had to spend his time with these kids when he was already 32, and his 4-year-old sister Yuna was so happy to spend all her time with her brother that her smile never left her face because the girl was still crazy about him. Yuna wanted to tell her little brother the rules of the game because he was going to play cops and bandits for the first time. The boy was willing to do much more for the sake of his sister's smile. He was very pleased to see her so happy and cheerful. After playing games with the children, they went home, walking along the streets of the city, and the sun was shining very brightly. At that time, the boy was dissatisfied and resented the fact that after playing cops and bandits, his clothes were all in the mud, at which his sister laughed quietly. Yuna, with a smile on her face, asked her brother if he had fun and found it interesting when he was playing cops and bandits. Yunho thought back on his time and realized that it wasn't worth it to obsess over the cleanliness of his clothes because it was temporary and not important at all. The boys suddenly heard a sound, and it was the growling of a large and vicious dog that did not cease to gallop. Yuna froze in place, and her face showed how frightened the girl was, while her brother was calm and focused. The boys saw in a dark alleyway among the houses a big mean dog that kept growling at them and snarling viciously. The dog's eyes were inflamed, and saliva was continuously dripping from its mouth. Then the guys realized that it was a rabid dog. Yuna, despite her fear, was still determined and with her hand tried to ward off her little brother. The girl was very tense because of her fear, and it was difficult for her to speak without stammering. But she wanted to tell her brother that everything was all right and thus reassure him. Yuna could no longer contain her emotions and hugged her brother tightly, saying that she would always be by his side. The girl was still covering Yunho with herself for fear that the rabid dog might attack at any moment. But then the boy touched her hand. Yunho didn't stand aside anymore and came out from behind his sister's back, surprising Yuna very much. The girl didn't understand what he was going to do. The boy, deciding for himself that it was before he was weak and just trembling in the arms of his sister. But at this moment and in this life, everything was completely different. He remembered his sister telling him that she would always be there for him, and that memory gave him even more confidence. The boy decided to use his mana, and a moment later, his whole body was covered with a blue glow. His sister, who was watching this action, was very surprised. The dog that had been watching the boy intently suddenly pressed its ears to the ground, and it was Yunho who compelled it to do so. Yunho was very focused and mentally ordered the rabid dog to get out of there and leave him and his sister alone. In a moment, the frenzied dog was already running back into a dark alleyway among the houses, and at the same time, the dog whined incessantly. Yunho was still covered in a blue glow, but the silhouette of the mad dog was almost invisible, which meant that the boy had succeeded. The boy was able to accomplish all this and fenced himself and his sister away from the evil rabid dog. Not all given to him so easily, and so he exhaled in relief when it was all over. Yuna stared at her little brother without blinking and thought about how frightened the girl was. The boy tried to reassure his older sister and said that he was perfectly fine, even smiling while looking at Yuna. Yuna pounced on him with a steady stream of questions. She wanted to know how he had done it, if it was his mana, and she demanded that he teach her how to do it. Yunha listened to all these questions and thought that from the outside, it looked very touching and quite expected for his sister. The boy couldn't take any more of these endless questions, so he just agreed and promised that he would teach Yuna. Yuna remembered another point he had thought of earlier, that he was going to help his sister in this matter. As Yuna heard the positive answer from her brother, she was wildly excited and could not contain her emotions, which were all written on her face. The girl took her brother's hand and said that they should have run home a long time ago, or their mom would start to worry about them. Yunha thought about how he always wanted to protect his sister's smile, and then he also remembered that before his body regressed and his entire family was destroyed when he was only 6 years old, the boy realized that it was necessary to prevent all this at any cost, to change the future, and in any case not to allow such a thing to happen. Yunha was determined to achieve his goal and was willing to do absolutely anything for his family, for the sake of his sister's smile. The boys were in the room, and while Yunha was watching his sister, she was trying to use her mana to spin the ula. Yunha told her sister that this was not right and that she needed to put enough power in the right direction so that balance could be maintained. The boy explained to Yuna that she had been born with the gift of preserving large volumes, but unfortunately, she had no talent for control. However, he believed that someday things would change. Yuna was very angry and very determined that this time she would succeed and would be able to spin this ula the way it should be spun. Yuna's hands were embraced by a blue glow as she applied mana, and her eyes were filled with determination. At this moment, the girl, with all her anger, directed her mana at the ula, and it flew back to the wall. At that moment, Yunha sighed heavily and said that his sister still needed to study and learn. The screen showed a girl with a bouquet in her hands and tears in her eyes, telling her viewers that it was an honor for someone as undeserving as her to receive such a meaningful award. The whole family gathered in the room and watched TV, sitting on the couch, and they were all fascinated by what they were broadcasting, except for the boy himself because he was skeptical about it all. The boy's mom remembered and said that next year Yuna would turn 6 and go to kindergarten. Yunha was completely sure that he didn't need any kindergarten, but his mom reminded him of the promise he had made earlier. The boy remembered that his constant whining had made his parents give up on the idea of sending him to kindergarten, but he promised his mother that he would go to kindergarten as soon as he was 6. Yunha couldn't believe that he would be stuck among the noisy children who started crying for any reason for a long time, and just thinking about it gave him a headache. The TV presenter was telling at that moment that there was only 1 minute left until the end of the current year and reminded his viewers that today would leave a trace in the history of mankind. The speaker asked everyone to be more attentive to all the viewers who were watching TV at that moment and waiting for the end of the year. The reporter girl broadcasted that she was with her team at Jongmyo Temple and said that their ancestors, who were members of the Joseon dynasty, were buried there and that this was the place where a new chapter in Korean history would begin. Yunha was very skeptical of all these words and disagreed with the presenter's words about the new head of the entire human race. He remembered well that after mankind had discovered mana, people had only been using it constantly. The boy knew very well that people did not take into account the fact that using mana generates monsters, and so in 1999, just before the beginning of the 21st century, there was an incident, namely the end of the world. He couldn't forget that back then about 30% of the entire population had been lost, and those were crazy numbers. The boy remembered what humanity was experiencing at that moment, and it was shaking with fear because people had to get along with the threat of monsters that came out of nowhere. He remembered the moment when all the government and laws lost all their power, and the only power that could win was mana, which created a new hierarchy in the world. The most powerful people and players with powerful mana had united into a new force, But the problem was that by the time the situation had stabilized, humanity had already suffered great damage because cities had lost contact with each other, and large areas remained in isolation, and their destruction was a matter of time. In Korea, which at that time was already full of despair, a small light was lit, and all people began to live with this hope. A beautiful girl dressed in a beautiful dress was completely enveloped by a blue glow and continued to walk majestically. The girl was very beautiful. This fact could be said by anyone in Korea. All people admired this girl because she was beautiful to them, and if someone had already looked at her, they could not take their gaze from such beauty. Lim Il was the girl's name, and she was originally a popular actress but became the first goddess protector of all of Korea. The girl could stop the effects of mana and dispel it, and she was also endowed with the gift of white grace. It was decided that all players who defended the altar would become sword defenders of Korea, called the 12 Thrones. The boy knew that the players were run by the Mana Control Bureau, but the strongest of them created their own clans. Lim Il, because she had the rare gift of being able to stop monsters, was a very influential person in Korea and was therefore chosen as one of the 12 Thrones. Yunha knew that players who became a throne and belonged to a clan could use the power of the Bureau while also controlling the power of their clan. They did all this so they could have a way to monitor player activity. Great hopes were placed on those defenders of Korea that they would use all their strength. Lim Il really hoped that in the future, the work of the 12 Thrones would bear great fruit for Korea. The girl approached a sphere that stood on a hill, and this sphere was completely enveloped in a blue glow. Lim Il appealed to the gods of earth and heaven and asked them to give her the strength to protect this country from adversity. The girl continued to apply mana to this sphere, and its glow became brighter and brighter. After breaking through the barrier, the sky above the city was completely illuminated with a bright blue glow. The anchorwoman continued her live report and told her viewers that right now a cocoon was unfolding in front of them. That was a semi-spherical barrier that would keep the mana from raging, and it was coloring the skies of all of Seoul. Yuna heard the latest news on TV and jumped up from the couch, running to the balcony to see for herself. The girl watched carefully and intently from her balcony at everything that was happening while her brother stood at her back. She finally got to see what the girl reporter was talking about, and she couldn't help but be delighted. Yuna was not the only one watching everything that was going on because practically every citizen of Seoul was doing the same thing as the girl. Her whole family was already out on the balcony, and Yuna could not keep silent about how beautiful the sky of their city was at night. The boy's father prayed and was very grateful to all the gods that now they could all finally live in peace. Mom bowed her head at this point too and was very grateful to the goddess for everything that had just happened. Not only did the boy's parents do this, but in almost every home, the pattern was very similar because they were all grateful for what they had been given. Yuna decided that she didn't want to be left out either and wanted to pray, which she did. The girl beckoned for her younger brother to bring words of gratitude as well, but Yunha himself wasn't going to do it. Yunha just did not understand why all people did it and, most importantly, to whom they prayed because the boy was sure that there were no gods in this world. The boy thought so because he remembered that when everything came to an end, the gods were also destroyed. In every house, one could see silhouettes in the windows that never ceased to watch intently all that was happening in the sky above their city. The boy also looked up at the sky and noticed that the skies above the city were beginning to turn black. Yuna, at this time, continued to pray, and the girl asked the gods most of all to let her family live happily. Yunha was touched by what he heard from his sister because family was the most precious thing to him. He did not hold back any longer and began to pray himself, wanting most of all for his family, that they and he together with them would be happy in this life. The boy Yunha was 6 years old, and the very incident that had taken his entire family was getting sadly closer. The boy's parents sent Yuna to a kindergarten called Don, which meant evergreen pine trees, by the time he was 6 years old, as promised. Teacher Tao asked all the children for attention and silence, because he was telling them that a new friend was joining them today. The cheerful teacher Tao asked the boy if perhaps he would like to introduce himself to his new friends. The kindergarten boy only said his name was Yunha and that he was 6 years old. Thinking that was enough, Yunha, already at the very end, looking at all the children who were sitting in front of him, added only that it was a pleasure to meet them. Teacher Tao delicately told the boy that it was very short and that Yunha might want to add something else because the teacher was sure that the children wanted to be friends with the boy. Yunha didn't think he needed children as friends, and as soon as he said that, he heard the voice of someone he didn't expect at all. A girl who was sitting among the other children indignantly started asking what Yunha was doing in this particular kindergarten group. Yunha recognized his acquaintance in the girl who was talking. She was the same Dry Minnie, and the boy wasn't too happy about the fact that she was in this group either. The girl could no longer contain her emotions and jumped up indignantly, saying that she had already asked him not to call her that. Teacher Tao tried to reassure the children that they would still have free time before lunch and asked them to be more friendly to Yunha. The children apparently missed the teacher's words and request and all together rushed to the surprised and frozen boy. Yunha could hear the children's questions from all sides, such as where he lived, whether he wanted to play mother-daughter, or whether he knew how to add and subtract. The teacher looked at them and thought that everything would probably be all right. Yunha could barely escape the endless stream of questions and once again was convinced that he didn't particularly enjoy contact with other children. The boy came across a children's book corner and decided that although these books were for babies, they were an opportunity to pass the time in silence. In the children's library, a girl with a red bow in her hair was already sitting at the table, watching the boy who had just arrived in surprise. Yunha, however, did not notice anything or anyone around him and continued to sit and flip through the children's books he had picked up earlier. The girl who saw him still froze and did not move, only watching her new neighbor with her big eyes. The girl did not even pay attention to the fact that guests came to her from behind until they addressed her personally. The boy, whose name was Cho Yoon-hook, was with two of his companions and sarcastically asked the girl if she was reading again, not understanding what everyone found in those books. Yoon-hook wanted to know from Yang Hyan, that's the girl's name, why she always sat here alone, probably because she had no friends at all. Hyan, recognizing this boy as not her best friend, wanted to ask him to leave her alone and not touch her. But before Hyan could even say a word, Yoon-hook brazenly ripped the red ribbon off her head and said that it was not proper to wear such ribbons. Hyan tried to convince the boy to give her back her ribbon because she got it from her dad. But Yoon-hook wasn't going to do it because he just didn't want to. The guy suggested to the girl that she try to take the ribbon from them and started throwing it to one or the other. Hyan asked the boys to give her back her red ribbon because it was very precious to her. Yoon-hook wasn't going to give anything back, and to the girl's request in response, he just showed his tongue and started teasing her. The boys continued to tease Hyan when suddenly they heard from a strange boy who was sitting at the table that they were being childish. They all began to watch the stranger intently, but only Yunha himself continued to sit still with a bored look on his face. Yoon-hook couldn't stand it at first and turned to Yunha to see what he had told them. Yunha could no longer be on the sidelines and could no longer remain silent, so he stood up from the table. He came close to Yoon-hook and repeated once more, looking him in the eye, that he said he was acting like a kid and that he didn't think it was all that much fun. Yoon-hook wasn't endowed with any patience at all, and so without a second thought, he first insulted Yunha and then threw himself at him. Yunha was able to evade this attack without much difficulty, but Yoon-hook himself was unable to stand on his own feet. The boy had managed to snatch the red ribbon from his attacker during all of this, and now Yunha was scrutinizing it. Yunha walked over to the girl and handed back the ribbon that started this whole conflict. He advised Hyan not to let anyone take that ribbon from her next time. Yoon-hook tried to shout at him and said that he wouldn't let it go, but Yunha wasn't afraid of those words because they were spoken by a child of 6 years old. The boy made a promise to Yoon-hook that he would definitely get to him next time. Hyan touched the sleeve of the boy who had helped her so much and wanted to say something to him, but she was too shy. Gaining courage, the girl sincerely thanked her savior for giving her back her red ribbon. Yunha noticed that Minnie and that boy Yoon-hook had much more mana than the average person, and none of the other kids stood out anymore. He watched all the children closely, but only this girl, Yang Hyan, was not like anyone else at all. Hyan continued to stand and watch her savior admiringly, while clutching her red ribbon tightly to her, while her entire body was engulfed in the blue glow of her mana. The girl had an impossibly large amount of mana, perhaps even more than his sister. The boy noticed that she was very skillful at controlling it, and so the mana around her was concentrated and not dispersed. Such a child would be one of the 12 thrones in the future, or at least their apprentice. Yunha looked at the girl carefully and realized that he had never heard her name before the regression. And even if she didn't become a player, she would definitely become popular because of so much mana inside her. He couldn't fully explain his actions and reasons, and so he extended his hand and offered Yang Hyan to become friends with him. The girl still apparently did not fully understand what was going on at all and answered him with her consent. Yunha knew that mana was a very great power in this world, and so looking at the girl's potential, he knew very well that it would be good to stay close to her. Hyan and Yunha solidified their emerging friendship with a firm handshake. The girl was happy about this turn of events, and the boy in return suggested that they become very good friends. After a busy day at kindergarten, Yunha returned to his home and was glad he did. The boy's mom was happy about such a gift and immediately pinned it on her sweater while remembering to thank Yunha. Yunha realized that mom was referring to the paper carnation he had made in kindergarten, and she had taken it out of his backpack herself. The mom didn't forget to thank her daughter Yuna as well and said she thought it was even better than the actual carnation. Yunha noticed the gift from his sister and decided that if this was also a carnation, then apparently Yuna was very bad at it. The sister took the carnation in her hands and said that here she had another one, and it belonged to her brother, to which Yunha replied in agreement. Mom turned to her son with mortification as she realized that Yunha had made as many as 3 carnations, and apparently one of them was for Yuna. Yunha was in a very awkward situation and didn't know what to say to this. And at this moment, his sister was looking at him with adoration. The boy sadly bowed his head and informed his family that he had made another carnation for his grandmother. He remembered that even before the regression, when Parents' Day came up, they used to put these carnations together at school, and he was made to do them with everyone in the class. Even though his parents were long gone, those carnations were at the bottom of his backpack, and his grandmother would find them every time she packed him for school and put them on the nightstand in the hallway, but never on any of the holidays did he give them to her directly. He thought that when he gave them to her, he would immediately lose his longing for his family and his anger at the monsters. The boy did not show his gratitude until his grandmother went to the other world, but in this life, he would do things differently. On May 4th, the government decided to open the forbidden roads so that citizens could unite with their families in other cities in time for Family Month. A large number of players had been hired by the government to be ready for monsters on the roads, but because of the sudden appearance of the Kraken, many people were destroyed. On the way to his grandmother's house, his family was caught by the monster and sent to the other world. Dad suggested the whole family see Grandma because tomorrow the vacation started and there was free time. While the family was discussing this moment, Yunha, on the other hand, became silent and tried to decide what to do next. Yunha knew exactly one thing, that he must stop at all costs and save his family. The whole family gathered in one room and discussed Dad's suggestion that they go to Grandma's. Yunha knew well that they had only one grandmother since his dad was an orphan, and so he only had a grandmother on his mom's side. The boy remembered that before his return and after his family had been destroyed, he had been raised by his grandmother. She supported him when he was unhappy or if he failed, but then his grandmother had gone to the other world. Dad explained to them all that it used to be very dangerous to go out of town, but this year it should be safer after the government took over the roads. Yunha turned to his parents and wanted to ask them to all go to his grandmother's house another time. The parents could not understand their son's request and why he was refusing now because the government had already taken care of everything. The mother appealed to the boy that if he made a carnation for his grandmother in kindergarten, it meant that he would really like to see her. Yunha agreed with his mother's words and he missed his grandmother very much, but he didn't want to go on that day and suggested that the trip be postponed. The boy understood perfectly well that he was only a child and his word meant nothing, and that's why he had to behave like a child in order not to be suspected by his parents. Yunha shouted that after all, it would be Children's Day soon and he would really like to go to the amusement park to ride the Viking, especially since it was not far from their house. When Yuna heard what her little brother wanted, she was happy to support him and said that she also wanted to ride a Viking. Dad reflected on the fact that none of his children had actually been to an amusement park yet because there was a period of great monster activity. Yun's father still decided that this factor should definitely be fixed, and tomorrow they would all go to that park together. Mom wanted to make her family something delicious for dinner and asked them what they would like. Yuna, without much thought, asked her mom to make her some nuggets and a sandwich. The boy thought that since he could not stand in the way of the Kraken, he could stand in the way of his parents to come to him, and it could change the future. Mom received an unexpected call on her phone, and her face became very concerned with disbelief. She once again questioned whoever was on the phone with her about whether this was about her grandmother. Mom thanked whoever called her and at the end really asked her to take care of Grandma. The whole family was excited and worried because it was about their beloved grandmother and they did not know what happened to her. Yun's mom told everyone that Grandma suddenly felt sick and fainted because of it. Yuna was getting angry because it couldn't be like this. Before the regression, everything had been fine with his grandmother until he entered the Players' Academy. Mom really hoped that Grandma was fine and nothing serious, but because she was very worried and could not go to her, Dad was worried too, and so he made the decision that he would definitely go with her to make sure everything was actually okay. Dad informed everyone that no one could go to the amusement park at this hour, and so tomorrow, as soon as roadside security was prepared, they would all go together to check on Grandma. Mom was now starting to worry about her son. She didn't want him to be upset because they had already promised him. She knew that the boy really wanted to go to the amusement park and so she offered to go to it for sure but some other time. Yunha thought that his grandmother was hurt because he tried to change the future, and he was worried that if he tried to do anything else, who knows what else might happen. There was no way he could prevent his family from meeting the Kraken, and if so, then nothing would be different. The boy thought about the fact that there was one difference and that was himself because now he was completely different. Yunha had begun to accumulate mana since he was a child, and he still had battle experience from his past life. The boy agreed with his mother's words that they would go to the amusement park another time. Yunha turned to his family and said that if nothing could be done, they would go to grandmother's house. The boy had set his mind to the fact that if he could not prevent his family from meeting the Kraken, then he would fight the monster. Yunha wasn't going to give up and was willing to do anything for his family. The Bureau of Mana Control categorized all monsters based on their threat level. Class N9 included those that polluted the environment or spread disease, and Class 8 included monsters that physically threatened everyday life. The 7th class included those who committed robberies, and the 6th class included monsters who terrorized city districts alone or in groups. The 5th class were those who committed terror alone or in groups and had equal strength. The 4th class were monsters leading hordes from the others, and they enslaved people and threatened their well-being. Class 3 are those that threaten the integrity of an entire government and had a disaster-level threat. The 2nd class included monsters that were the equivalent of a catastrophe, and the remaining 1st class were those that threatened the existence of all mankind. The Kraken belonged to the 3rd class. Yunha recalled that even before his regression, around the time he entered the Kraken Academy, the Krakens were relegated to the 4th grade because of the players' great efficiency. The dispersed players of a certain class or rank were too weak to fight the Kraken. The boy was well aware that he could not defeat this monster alone, and there was only one possibility. He knew he needed to wait for the 12 thrones to make it through. Yunha realized that all he could do to help was to buy as much time as possible. The boy was preparing for the trip and reasoned that the weapons a child might have are scissors and a box cutter. And that's it. A kitchen knife would be nice, but Mom would notice if it went missing. Yunha thought that even such a flimsy weapon, if he endowed it with mana, could do some damage to the monster. His older sister peeked into the boy's room to see if he was ready to go. Yuna informed Yunha that they were all packed and ready to go to Grandma's and were only waiting for him. The city's roads were full of cars, all because the government had installed extra security. Yun's whole family was in all this traffic. They were traveling to check on their grandmother. The mother turned to her son and advised him to get some rest and sleep because they had a long road ahead of them. Yunho was fine and he informed his mom about it, but his older sister was already sleeping soundly on his shoulder. The boy remembered that the Kraken had appeared on Sanson Bridge just as they were crossing the middle of it. But his family had already passed the middle and Yunha didn't understand why it hadn't shown up yet. Yunha assumed that the Kraken still hadn't shown up yet because something else had changed in the future. The boy really hoped they would be able to at least just make it across that bridge. Moments later, there was a huge explosion on the Sanson Bridge and everything was engulfed in flames. The boy's dad froze in place and his gaze was disheartened at what he saw. Yuna clung tightly to her little brother and was very frightened, but the boy realized that fate could not be changed. The boy thought that this fate was like laughing at his desperate desire to change everything. Yunha finally saw someone who belonged to the 3rd class and was a disaster-level monster, and it was a Kraken. The Kraken's huge tentacles destroyed absolutely everything in their path and spared no one. The Kraken that appeared on the bridge with its tentacles demolished all the cars, turning them into pieces of metal. People got out of their cars and just ran wherever they could to try to escape and survive. All the people didn't understand where the players who were supposed to guard the road were at this difficult moment. The players finally showed up and rushed to the very epicenter of the disaster and intended to provide protection for all people. One of the players suddenly heard a very strange noise above his head, and what he saw horrified him. The huge tentacle collapsed after a moment and destroyed everything underneath it. The family was sitting in the car, watching all the horror that was happening in front of their eyes, and they were very scared. Dad decided that they couldn't stay in the car any longer and they had to get out, but because of the chaos that was going on outside, they all had to be extremely careful. He wanted to convey to his children that if they moved slowly, they could safely escape. Yunha, who heard all this, did not agree with his father's opinion, but since he was still a child, his reasoning was not very interesting. Mom appealed to her children that they should do everything as Dad told them to, get out of the car, and not worry about anything because the players would protect them. The whole family, sticking to their head of household's plan, got out where the real disaster was happening. Yunha saw his older sister stumble to the ground and the boy was very scared for her. The girl suddenly realized that she couldn't get up because she hurt her leg. Yuna tried to pull herself together with all her strength because she had to get up and move on, and staying in one place would put her in great danger. Daddy saw what happened to his daughter and decided to help her and told her not to worry about anything. He would carry her in his arms. He turned to his son, asking whether he was all right and would be able to move on. 100. The boy replied that he was perfectly fine. The player noticed the family and told them to follow him, and he would show them a place to evacuate the people. Yunha did as he was told and saw that the players were not collected and were in a panic because a 3rd-class monster had appeared. But the veteran players were quicker to adapt to the situation and began to evacuate people. The boy knew that the Kraken was not their only problem and they should definitely try to cross the bridge. The player who accompanied him and the boy's entire family to the evacuation site was suddenly attacked and was unable to repel the attack. Dad, with Yuna in his arms, was shocked by what he saw in front of him and didn't understand what they should do now and how he could keep his family safe. They saw ahead the paws of one of the monsters that had very sharp claws. Yunha, recognizing these monsters, was very upset that they didn't make it out in time to be in a safe place. They were 7th grade monsters that the players within their circle called divers. These monsters had an intimidating appearance and their entire mouth was full of sharp and very dangerous fangs for humans. Players fought these 7th grade monsters as best they could and tried to save as many people as they could at any cost. One of the players found a girl who had suffered from the monster's clutches, and this guy was trying to find someone near them who had healing magic. The woman was already running to their aid because she could help the girl. The player saw that the woman who had healing magic was unable to get to them because she was attacked by monsters, and they were everywhere. A family that was still trying to find where the evacuation for people was taking place was watching all the horror that was going on. Dad tried to reassure his children and told them to trust him and be sure that no matter what happened, he would protect them. He could no longer contain his emotions and shouted loudly for them to run immediately and not look back in any way. No one dared to heed the words of the head of their family, and they ran as fast as they could, and none of them looked back. The Kraken, at this time, continued to rampage and used its tentacles to destroy everything around it. The monster, by its actions, created real chaos and disaster, and a very large number of people suffered from his clutches. Yunha saw what was happening and the boy was seized with a wild rage at what was happening. The boy tried to shout to his father and tell him that what they were doing now was very dangerous. A huge number of cars were already turned into a pile of metal and people were trying to escape who could. The shock wave sent one of the cars flying off to the side and collided with a truck. This collision caused a huge explosion and the whole area was engulfed in flames. Yunha and his family were on a small hill at that moment and watched in horror as the fire enveloped everything. Daddy, with Yuna in his arms, was trying to figure out what they should do next, and he was trying his best to stay calm, so his kids wouldn't worry. The boy had heard that the players did not know where their reinforcements were, even though they had been here for a short time, but they could not cope on their own and were worried that the roads were on fire. Yunha realized one thing. They needed to hold out until the backing of the throne's support. The boy hadn't forgotten that even before the regression, the 12 thrones had arrived 30 minutes behind the Kraken, and he realized that it was unlikely that the players would be able to protect anyone if the escape routes were blocked. The 12 thrones could deal with monster divers when they arrived, but if no one could handle the Kraken, they'd all go to the afterlife. Yunha dropped his backpack and finally decided that he would fight because he had been preparing for this from the beginning. The boy was willing to put a lot on the line, but he would not back down and would defend his family to the very end. He took his weapons out of his backpack, and they were scissors and a clerical knife. His older sister, who was watching him at that moment, didn't understand what he was going to do. Yunha turned to his parents and asked them not to go anywhere until help arrived. Dad looked at his son and was perplexed at what he was even doing and saying. Yunha, as if not hearing his father's question at all, continued to tell them that the players were currently repelling the monster attacks. The boy also said that if anything happened anyway, Yuna could protect them from trouble. Yunha explained that besides himself, only Yuna could control mana here, and he had faith in his older sister. Yuna rounded her already large eyes to listen to her brother carefully and couldn't believe it. The girl tried to stop Yunha, but it was too late. He ran into the very epicenter of the battle. The boy was determined and confident in his actions, and at the same time ran and tightly clutched his weapon, which was a clerical knife. Yunha ran hard to meet his opponent, and it was the third-class monster, Kraken himself. The boy applied mana and his feet began to light up with a bright blue glow, and he decided to use the Sky Step skill. Yunha was so concentrated that drops of sweat appeared on his face, but he wasn't going to give up on his scheme. The boy had often used the mobility skill before regression, but this was the first time he had used it in this body, and it was a bit hard for the kid. Yun realized that no matter how hard it was for him right now, he would be able to reach the Kraken instantly thanks to the Heaven Step skill. The boy made a great leap and in a moment was in the very epicenter of the battle. People fleetingly turned their attention to someone speeding past them. The players noticed the boy and could not understand what he was doing and where he was running to because it was very dangerous there now. The monsters called divers heard a strange sound and all their attention turned towards the boy. Yunha ran straight to meet these monsters while applying full mana envelopment. The boy was jumping from one car roof to another at high speed, and the divers were already rushing to meet him. Yunha, thanks to his mana, could quite easily and deftly deal with these monsters that were trying to attack him. The boy did not pity or spare any of them. He was very determined and thought only that he needed to protect his family. Yunha destroyed one diver with his clerical knife as another monster was already trying to pounce on him from above. The boy was able to handle both one monster and another without sparing anyone. Yunha realized that he needed to gather all his strength and be very careful. The boy actively used his clerical knife as a weapon against the divers. The beast was strong and it wasn't easy to defeat, and so in one of the attacks, Yunha was thrown onto the hood of one of the cars on the road. Yunha was able to get to his feet and using mana was ready to do battle with the monsters again. There were a lot of divers and they surrounded the boy from all sides, blocking all his paths. The boy gathered all his strength and planned to attack the monsters again and win at any cost. Yunha saw memories of his past life in which he fought monsters time after time and never retreated. The boy remembered all the monsters and different classes and levels that had ever been in his path. Yunha was currently still fighting the divers and he was already having more success with those attacks. The boy noticed that skills from his past life began to return to him and he was able to remember the feelings he had when he destroyed the monsters. Yunha felt that right now he was once again becoming someone who could defeat and overpower anyone who would get in his way. He had a second wind and without a second thought, he threw himself at the monsters because the safety of his family was at stake. The boy had gotten into the excitement and was already more confident in his abilities and capabilities than before. He was distracted by his thoughts and musings and didn't notice one of the monsters lurking under the car while the boy was on the roof. The diver wanted to attack the boy, but he failed and he was defeated and went to the other side of the world. Yunha didn't have time to deal with one monster, but a moment later he was attacked by another monster hoping for the effect of surprise. The monster failed to achieve its goal and recovered to the other world following the past monster. The boy fought vigorously and in one of his attacks lost his weapon because the clerical knife failed and broke into small pieces. Yunha was very sorry for this loss as this knife had not lasted him long at all. The boy remembered that when he had packed his things, he had brought a pair of scissors in addition to a pocket knife. He decided that enough was enough and it was time for him to end it all and rushed forward. Yunha ran at great speed just across the roofs of the cars that had been left behind by the people during this chaos. The boy suddenly began to brake sharply because there was a great danger ahead of him. Yunha saw a Class 3 monster in front of him, and it was a kraken whose eyes were burning a bright red color. The boy was forced to fight the monster using only scissors as his weapon. The kraken, for its attacks, used its tentacles that were large in size and could destroy everything around it. The monster swung around and struck with one of those tentacles at all the cars that were left on the road. Yunha barely managed to avoid this blow, and using his mana, the boy managed to jump onto one of the tentacles. The boy tried to find a way out of the situation because he could not give up. He had to protect his family. He broke his scissors into 2 pieces and used them to try his best to stay on the monster. Yunha's size against this monster was certainly inferior, but he had no other choice. The boy used his strength and tried time after time with his weapon to harm the kraken. The monster was not going to be patient and was able to throw the boy off his body quite easily. Yunha could barely survive and noticed that his weapon was already damaged and the single blade of the scissors was already useless. The boy was optimistic and was glad that he had the other half of the scissor blade still intact. Yunha did not despair but instead only moved forward and began to attack the monster again. The boy wanted to repeat his past maneuver and tried to latch onto the kraken with one blade. The monster was already prepared for this turn of events and took a big swing with one of its tentacles. Yunha was thrown a great distance away from the monster by the large shockwave, and it was already obvious that his plan had failed. The boy tried with all his might to slow his fall and break his feet against the pavement. Yunha was upset and frustrated at the same time because his mana was about to run out and he didn't know how to proceed. The boy had been on the bridge all this time fighting monsters, and the kraken decided to take advantage of this. The monster wanted to demolish the bridge support with its attacks and then its problem would cease to exist. Yunha saw the whole disaster that was unfolding around him with renewed vigor. The boy realized that this monster was unfortunately just as stubborn and persistent. The whole road around the boy was turning into ruins, and it was getting harder and harder for him to resist. On this asphalt, each time the kraken did not calm down but continued to rampage, destroying everything it could reach. Yunha tried his best to hold on and not fall, and kept trying to think of a new plan for his next actions. Everything that was around had already been destroyed, all the cars from small cars to big trucks. The boy concentrated and tried to summon all of his remaining mana because he needed it. Yunha gathered not only his mana but also his persistence and shouted to the monster that he would now be held accountable for all that he had done. He struck a powerful blow with his weapon on the entire road, and as a consequence, everything that was standing on it was thrown upwards by the shock wave. Yunha's actions created a massive explosion as several cars collided with each other. The boy clutched his scissors tightly in his hand and had no intention of stopping there. Yunha suddenly began to feel that something was wrong with him as his hands suddenly went numb. The boy almost couldn't move, and that was because he had used up all his mana during the battle with the kraken. He was lying on the pavement, almost exhausted, and didn't know what to do now. Yunha was well aware that if he lost consciousness now, everything he tried to do would be all for nothing. All his attempts to destroy the monster and thus save his family were becoming unrealistic. The boy was losing strength by the second, and his vision was already beginning to blur, and the outcome was obvious. Suddenly hitting the pavement sharply, he tried to pull himself together and not let it end like this. Even though Yunha was now a 6-year-old child, he was the leader of the Misty Flower team in his previous life, a title that was not given to just anyone. The boy knew only one thing: he just had to go all the way, and he had no right to give up. Yunha thought about his parents and his older sister and realized that he really wanted to live this life with his family. The kraken continued to rage, and its tentacles demolished everything in front of it. The boy saw one of those tentacles of incredible size threatening to descend upon him at any moment. Yunha repeated time after time that he would not let the monster destroy him, and he did not know yet how, but he would definitely stop it. A boy who couldn't find a solution to his problem suddenly felt something. Yunha, who appeared as if out of nowhere, shouted to the monster not to dare to touch her little brother. The boy himself took it all as a miracle. The girl was this miracle and hugged her brother tightly, and around them, the boys themselves were enveloped in a golden glow. She used her mana and protected herself and her younger brother Yunha with a barrier against the monster. The monster divers saw what was happening and froze in amazement, for even they had not expected such a turn of events. Yunha used such a strong barrier that a pillar was encompassed, and it looked fascinating. The boy thought that everything that was happening was simply impossible, and it was actually something else than a real miracle, namely a gift that allowed changing the world and its laws. Before the regression, Yunha had only known 4 people who possessed such a gift and ability. Li Wan was the name of the person who possessed such a gift, and the girl was also his trusted partner. Yunha had thought even earlier when he noticed Yuna had such a large amount of mana that his older sister might actually have that gift. Yuna hugged her brother tightly and told him that everything would definitely be fine now. The boy was surprised to notice that his wounds were beginning to heal, and he found it hard to believe. Yunha also noticed that the light that came from his sister was protecting them from the kraken. The boy began to worry because the use of such a gift never happens without a trace, and those who possess it will have to pay a great price to change the world. Yunha became increasingly worried about his sister and asked the girl if she was all right and if anything hurt. Yuna smiled, looking at her little brother, and tried to reassure him that she was perfectly fine and only a little tired. The girl, after a moment, abruptly lost all her strength from the use of her gift and lost consciousness. Yuna couldn't resist it, and a small glow continued to shine above her. The boy saw that his sister had very little mana left in her, but it was enough to keep her alive. Yunha gently placed the girl on the pavement and realized that for her, the price of using the gift was mana itself. The boy decided that what his sister had done was more than enough, but he would have to do the rest himself. Yunha stood in front of the monster and was ready to fight with all his might so that what his sister had done would not go unchallenged. Kren watched all of this closely, and even the monster was amazed at all that had happened. The boy saw that the monster opened its eyes wide and was glad that apparently even the monster was scared of Yuna. Yunha warned the kraken not to even expect to get close to his sister. The boy would never allow it and would do everything possible and impossible to do so. Yunha used his mana and set his mind determined to attack the monster, and nothing could stop him. The boy applied all his skills and abilities and was going to go all the way. Yunha noticed that his mana had recovered thanks to his older sister saving him. The boy was well aware that he would not be able to defeat the kraken completely, but the most important thing was that the future had already changed and his family was safe. Yunha no longer feared anything. He just had to hold out until the thrones arrived. Before the kraken appeared, a man was on the one bridge near the main action scene. The man who was sitting in the car at the time was very indignant that the rest of the traffic didn't even think to move. He was getting angry at the driver for not driving but just apparently steering, to which the driver replied that it was because there were a lot of cars on the road and all the roads around Seoul were like that now. The man in the backseat of the car was already thinking that maybe he should leave the 12 thrones because instead of relaxing on his golden vacation, he was doing something else. He joined up because he wanted to fight shoulder to shoulder with the tough guys, and instead he had to deal with civilians. Suddenly, they saw a great deal of mana ahead and were greatly surprised by it. The man who was sitting in the back seat dialed the phone and immediately asked if he thought it was all up ahead, and the response was that it was. The man on the phone reported that he agreed with the information. He knew it was a Class 3 kraken. The man who heard what class the monster belonged to was very surprised and wary. The driver was listening to his passenger talk about how he could have fun when there was a monster raging ahead, and if people saw this reaction, they would be outraged. The person on the phone said that this was all happening on the Songsan Bridge, and that they couldn't resolve the situation while all those players were there. He was also told that they didn't know the exact damage that had already been done but were confident that the man would definitely be able to end all the chaos that was going on. The last thing he was told was that he could be picked up on the road soon. The man, or rather it was the lord of the clan, did not wait for anyone and decided to leave the car on his own. But he heard the driver ask him what he was going to do. The clan lord explained that it would be easier for him to get to the place he needed on his own because they would not be able to get there because of the traffic jams. The man from the back seat of the car took out his weapon, and it was a big sword because it would be very useful to him in the near future. The driver didn't understand how he was going to walk because it was at least 2 hours to the right place. The clan lord only laughed at this because he only needed 30 minutes because he was going to use his power. Using his strength, he rushed forward to the very epicenter of the events on the bridge. The driver did not expect anything else from him because that man was just obsessed with battles and always wanted to fight against the best. The man who was rushing over was the lord of the Blade clan, and he was also a fire demon, and his name was Kong Henel. Henel, after half an hour, was already there, and the first thing that came his way was a monster diver. The demon didn't bother with the monster for long, and immediately attacked it with a flaming sword in his hands. The man deftly and quickly coped with the first monster and ran onto the bridge, surprised to see the magic ahead, which was illuminated with a golden color. Henel knew there shouldn't be anyone in this place who was capable of such a thing. The fire demon realized well that all this could only mean one thing: that someone new had appeared on the bridge. A boy whose hands were completely enveloped in mana was fighting a third-grade monster. Henel appeared suddenly and immediately rushed into the epicenter of the battle, using his fire skill, which was aimed at the Kraken. Yunha saw the man and was finally able to breathe out a little, realizing that he wasn't the only one fighting the monster. The boy recognized the man as one of the 12 thrones, and it was the fire demon Kong Henel. The monster's tentacles were engulfed in fire, and the Kraken was no longer able to offer any resistance. It was not at all easy. The monster, trying to save itself, left the scene of battle as it could no longer fight back and hid in the water. The man was endowed with the gift of pyrokinesis, which gave him the ability to freely control fire, hence his nickname, the Fire Demon. He looked carefully at those he had come to help, and it was an unconscious girl and a 5- or 6-year-old boy staring at him intently. He was surprised to see only 2 children and even more surprised that there was a flow of mana around the girl, and he couldn't believe that she was the one doing all this magic. The man concluded that because the girl had spent all her mana, she had lost consciousness, and the boy was trying to protect her from the Kraken. The fire demon was already curious to see them when they became players because the children were very strong. Henel saw how wary the boy looked at him and tried to reassure the boy by telling him not to be afraid and that he wouldn't hurt them. The man looked at the boys once more and added to his sentence that at least now he wasn't going to touch them. Yunha looked at the man carefully and wasn't about to trust what he said. Henel informed them that he had a very different goal at the moment, and it was the Kraken, which he was going to get rid of by any means possible. The fire demon advised the boy to stay away because the monster would be coming out of the water soon. The Kraken, which at that moment was at the bottom of the river, was waiting for the right moment to return and fight with renewed vigor. Yunha recalled the moment when he came face to face with a fire demon for the first time in his past life. The boy was wary of the fire demon even then, and the latter informed him that he had heard of him because of his reputation. But Yunha wanted to know what he wanted from him. Henel replied that he just wanted to make sure the guy was as strong as everyone said he was and offered to fight him to test that fact. Yunha saw no point in this battle, and so he simply asked the fire demon to get out of his way. Henel, laughingly, replied that he didn't want or intend to go anywhere and that the guy could only get past him if he fought. Yunha stopped being restrained and, getting into a fighting stance, told the fire demon that he would regret it. Henel reacted instantly and was fully prepared to attack in a moment. The boy, hugging his older sister, looked at the man, remembering all the moments from his past life related to that one. Yunha remembered well the moment when Henel had constantly tried to challenge him to a duel before his return. The boy did not forget that he had never been able to win because he was getting stronger with each battle. Yunha thought he was truly a monster who was born to fight. The Kraken found the right moment to make itself known and surfaced from the water, beginning to attack again. The boys and the man were able to barely stay on the remaining bridge after the monster tried to attack them. Henel saw that the monster was able to destroy the column that supported the bridge, and he was overcome with rage. The man tried to think over his next plan of action, but seeing the guys, he realized that while they were here, it would be hard for him to fight. The fire demon spotted a helicopter in the sky above them, from which the silhouette of the Holy Mother could be seen, and it was very timely. The girl in the helicopter shouted that she had asked him many times not to call her that, but she wasn't old and didn't understand what the word mother had to do with it. It was the Holy Mother of the 12 Thrones, whose name was Pak Harem. Henel didn't understand why the fire demon had run all the way to this place on foot if they could get him here by helicopter. The man replied that he just needed to get to Seoul very urgently, and wasn't that clear? Harem said that reinforcements would be arriving soon, and then they could begin rescuing civilians, but for now he just needed to focus on the Kraken. The fire demon saw that the girl had applied her buffs for them, but the guy wanted to proudly refuse it but failed because Harem was more convincing. Harem informed another man that these guys were on him, and he was responsible for their safety. Yunha gently hugged his sister and still didn't trust anyone, counting only on himself. The Kraken no longer lurked at the bottom of the river and surfaced, fully revealing itself. Henel noticed that the monster had finally fully emerged and, without hesitation, rushed straight towards it while using his mana. The man picked up a lot of speed and jumped off the bridge straight into the water, intending to deal with this monster once and for all. Henel had already resurfaced from the water in a completely different form because he had used his fire skill, and his entire body was completely engulfed in fire. The man, as Yunha had said before, was born to fight, and he even enjoyed it. Henel stood in front of the third-class monster and planned his next actions. The Kraken did not wait but decided to be the first to attack and used its tentacles. The man's gaze was a little wild, and he had no doubt at all that he could overpower this monster. Henel struck the Kraken with his powerful blow, and in a moment, the entire monster was engulfed in that fire and had no chance of surviving. The fire demon, after being able to send the monster to the other world quite easily, began to take on a bit of his former appearance. Henel was already completely his old self and looked with satisfaction at his accomplished work. Yunha watched intently and was glad that the Kraken had finally been defeated. Harem, who had come down from the landed helicopter, ran to the guys to make sure they were okay. The girl tried to calm them down and explained that she would help them now while using healing magic. Harem suddenly noticed something that really struck her because the boys did not have a single scratch on them. The girl thought about whether it was a miracle, and it was the one that was able to heal their wounds. Harem found it all astonishing and never thought she would ever be able to witness a miracle in person. The girl wanted to make sure and examine the boy and the girl more closely, but she was not allowed to do so. The boy menacingly informed her not to even dare touch his sister and was very convincing in his words. Harem froze in astonishment, feeling threatened but not understanding how the boy could threaten like that. The girl was even more curious now and wanted to find out who this boy was. The resulting noise made it impossible for her to hear anything in response as a multitude of helicopters appeared over their heads. Harem saw that it was the rescue squad and decided that it would be better to get the boys to the hospital first and then figure things out. It was reported by the authorities that at 5 o'clock in the evening, a Kraken suddenly attacked the Songsan Bridge and caused a lot of damage to the bridge. All TV channels reported that rescue operations were still underway and people were being given the necessary assistance. Yunha listened to all this news that was reported on TV, but all his attention was riveted and focused on his older sister. Yuna was currently in the hospital and was still unconscious but safe. The girl's physician informed her brother that Yuna was severely malnourished due to the lack of mana in her body, but after she took a mana potion, she would be fine. Yunha was insanely happy that it was finally over and their lives were no longer threatened. The boy was glad that despite everything, he was able to change the future, even though he had no hope for it. Yunha suddenly heard himself being addressed by those he was not yet ready to see. The boy saw his parents rushing towards him and were very excited. His parents' gaze was so intense that Yunha realized he was about to get it. The boy stood in front of his parents and dutifully lowered his head, keeping silent. His mom was the first one who couldn't stand the silence and asked her son if he was okay or possibly hurt. Yunha quietly replied that he was fine and uninjured, but his head was still lowered. Mom asked what about his sister, and the boy replied that she had little mana and that's why she was sleeping now, but she was recently given a potion. The head of their family, hearing his son's answer, breathed a sigh of relief that his children were okay after all. Dad had calmed down a bit and now wanted to know why Yunha disobeyed him and ran away from them. The boy lowered his head even further and apologized to his parents for his disobedience. Yunha only didn't understand why he was apologizing to them since his family had been saved, and it was the best possible outcome. The boy was well aware that he wasn't sorry at all and would do the exact same thing again. Yunha only noticed in them that they were not at all worried about the outcome, but they were worried that he had run away to the monster and put himself in great danger. The boy remembered the feeling well and knew what it was like to lose his family, so he did what he thought was right at the time without asking his parents for their opinion. Yunha now understood what his mom and dad were going through, so he apologized to them more sincerely and said that he understood how wrong he was and that it would not happen again. The boy's mom couldn't take it anymore and held out her arms to him to come to her. Yunha didn't hesitate, and after a moment, rushed to his mother, hugging her tightly because she was very dear to him. Daddy hugged the two of them and asked the boy not to do that again because they were very worried. Yunha couldn't stand it and cried, promising his parents that he would never do that again because he didn't have to fight monsters anymore and could just be a child. And that's what the boy's parents wanted. The next morning, their entire family was still in the hospital after the incident. The head of the family turned to his son and told him to sit still and wait for them while they went to discharge his older sister. The boy obediently agreed and said that he would sit next to Yuna and would not go anywhere. Yunha realized that after the events on the bridge, his parents didn't trust him at all, but he hoped it would be over soon. The boy wanted something to occupy himself while his sister was still fast asleep and found something to eat. Yunha devoured what he could find, and it tasted delicious, leaving a satisfied look on his face. The boy wanted to find something else because he really wanted something sweet, perhaps because he had spent a lot of energy yesterday. Suddenly, Yunha saw a cookie being handed to him, and this made the boy very happy. The fire demon, Henschel, was the one who sat next to him and handed the boy sweets. The boy had not expected this turn of events at all, and now he sat looking warily at his unexpected guest. Henschel, not noticing the boy's hesitation, decided that maybe he just didn't like chocolate chip cookies. The fire demon decided to personally check and make sure, and so without asking, he stuffed the boy's mouth with that very same chocolate cookie. Yunha didn't understand what was going on with the man and why he was acting so strangely. Perhaps he had gone insane, though it was unlikely. Henschel looked at the boy carefully and suddenly decided to ask him how old he was. The man heard that the boy was only 6 years old and his sister 10, and for a fire demon they were still children. The fire demon wanted to know the name too, but the boy wasn't going to tell him his older sister's name without a good reason. Henschel interrupted the boy and clarified that he did not want to know the girl's name but his own. The fire demon heard that the boy's name was Yunha and suggested that he join the academy, promising to provide him with references from himself. Yunha, listening to the man, was perplexed by the fact that he wanted him to enter the academy and become a player, and when he grew up, fight him. The boy was shocked by this conclusion because the fire demon was already raising people to fight them in the future. Henschel said that, in principle, the boy still had plenty of time to think things over. The man spoke the boy's name again and promised he would be sure to remember it. Henschel left the surprised Yunha and exited the chamber where Harima was waiting for him outside the door. Harima watched as the fire demon was just about to leave and thought that this was definitely the kind of miracle that hadn't happened in Korea in a very long time. The man replied that this fact did not bother him at all, and it only mattered to him whether those guys were strong or not, to which the girl was once again convinced that Henschel was just obsessed with battles. Henschel replied that this was not true and that he was older than her, and since the girl was now in the 12 thrones, she needed to control her speech. The man explained his act by saying that if this miracle was as rare as she herself said it was, then the girl would attract the world's attention the moment they told them about it. Henschel added that the girl could never go back to normal after something like that, and he doubted that was what Harima wanted for Yunha. The man also said that if the girl understood all this, she should just forget about it and suggested that she should go to a cafe with him. Harima, behind the cafe, already mentally pictured different kinds of sweets and goodies. The fire demon explained that his offer was quite normal and adequate. He just wanted something sweet because he had spent a lot of energy. The next day, after the monster attack, the whole family was still able to visit Grandma. My mom excitedly asked her why she was standing outside and not resting in the house since she wasn't feeling well. The grandmother answered that she missed her relatives very much. That's why she decided to meet them, and she also wanted to see her grandchildren. She looked into the car and saw the kids sleeping soundly in the back seat and decided, well, let them rest better. Yunha woke up and didn't understand what was going on. He was also very cramped because his sister was sleeping next to him and hugging him tightly. The boy pushed his sister away and didn't realize that it was really so comfortable for the girl to sleep. Yunha turned his attention to his parents, who were sleeping nearby, especially to his mother, and realized that his sister must have gotten it from her. The boy gently tucked his sister in and still couldn't be happy that she was perfectly fine. Yunha, trying to leave the room quietly so as not to wake anyone up, decided to take a little walk. The boy sat by himself outside in the yard of his grandmother's house and thought about what had happened to him during this whole period. He saw that he had a lot more mana now. Perhaps it was because of his gift. Yunha, before his return, was the possessor of the gift of Berserker. The more mana he consumed, the stronger he became, but based on the name, it was important that the more mana spent, the crazier he became. The boy remembered that when he fought the Kraken, his sanity was fine, and if the downside of such a gift was absent, then it was the best gift. Then Yunha suggested that perhaps he was far from knowing everything about berserkers and their abilities. Suddenly, the grandmother leaned over him and asked why he was still awake. The boy thought about how long the grandmother had been there because he did not even feel her presence. Yunha explained to his grandmother that he had gotten enough sleep in the car, and so he didn't want any more for now. Grandma laughed and told the boy that if he wanted to become an adult, he would have to sleep a lot. Yunha always knew that as soon as he got too deep in his thoughts, Grandma would always be there. The boy knew his grandmother was waiting for him to start talking, and it didn't matter if it was about feelings or just about anything. Yunha decided to ask something completely neutral and asked his grandmother why she was awake. Grandma's answer was very simple and trivial. She doesn't sleep because her grandson, Yunha, doesn't sleep. The boy realized what he used to want very much, and that was to be near his grandmother, no longer as a child. The boy's grandmother decided to offer a drink of warm milk, but Yunha refused. Suddenly, a question was asked from behind if he was sure he didn't want to drink warm milk, and the boy was even more surprised because he hadn't noticed her coming. Mom, smiling, pointed to the spread that she had brought with her and to the 3 cups of milk that stood on it, and asked her son if he had changed his mind and wanted to drink it already. Yunha wrapped his hands around the cup of warm milk, enjoying the taste of it and especially the people around him. At that moment, the boy's mother explained to the grandmother how scared she was from that call. And so the grandmother once again repeated that she was perfectly fine and generally thought her neighbor sometimes exaggerated too much. She was still very excited when she was informed that grandma had fainted. Yunha listened carefully to his family's conversation and heard his grandmother talk about how she had just stumbled a bit and still thought she got off very lightly. Grandma reported that she was just distracted, and that's why it happened. But now Mom would really like to know what distracted Grandma so much. The boy's grandmother said that when she was walking up the stairs, she saw someone. Grandma preemptively beat Mom to the punch and replied that she was completely sane and asked her to listen to the rest of the story first. She said that at the top, there was someone waving his arms and trying to convince her grandmother not to climb the stairs. The grandmother looked at her grandson carefully and said that when she started to think about it all, she realized that the person who had said all this was not her but Yunha. Yunha listened to his grandmother very carefully and thought hard about it all. The boy was sure that it would be wrong to take it all as his grandmother's usual fantasy. Yunha knew that if something went wrong, his whole family would go to the other world just like his grandfather. The boy suggested that maybe it was his grandfather after all, but then he was sure that his grandmother should have told him earlier. Grandma thought it was all amazing and like it was all a while ago and went on to tell him that Grandpa told her there was a cute lonely fawn outside, and he, of course, went out to see. The boy's mom heard the story and remembered a similar situation that happened to her. She began to tell him that she too had had a similar dream, and in it, her father had left a deer. The mom abruptly decided to change the subject and asked the boy what he wanted to be when he grew up. Yunha really thought about his mom's question and went deep into himself in these thoughts. The boy began to imagine and see images of different beings who were relentlessly asking him to help and save them. The mom saw the changing emotions on her son's face and asked what was wrong with him. To reassure his mom, Yunha replied that he was fine and just didn't know what he wanted to be when he grew up. The boy was told not to worry about it because it was quite normal if he didn't already know. Grandma went on to explain that Yunha was still quite young, and in general there was no need to rush into this matter. She advised the boy to live the happy and hard moments of his life so that he would make friends and even fight with them. Grandma also added that the boy should study diligently, and then one day she was sure that he would definitely find his vocation. She advised, due to her older age, that Yunha should just live until he finds out what he would prefer. Yunha smiled and thought about what his grandmother was advising him, to just live his happy life. The boy's mom was in complete agreement with her grandmother's words because time was on Yunha's side, and he would definitely be able to handle everything. She told her son that his name is Yunha and it means the universe with infinite power. The mom added that she would always be proud of whatever the boy does because he is her son. The grandmother added that she too will always support her favorite grandson no matter what happens. Yuna appeared very quietly and suddenly said that she would really like some warm milk too. The relatives called Yuna to their house since she was already awake, and the girl's grandmother offered to give her a glass of warm milk. Yunha suddenly remembered something. Just because of all the recent events, he had completely forgotten about it. The boy gave his grandmother a paper carnation that he had specially made for her himself in kindergarten. Grandma was very pleased and said she would be sure to put it on the nightstand in the hallway for everyone to see. The boy knew that if she was putting it close to the entrance, it meant she wanted to show it off, but he was sure Grandma didn't know about it. Yunha thought that it didn't really matter because he had given her a gift because he wanted to. The boy wanted to do for his grandmother to give as many good memories as possible in this life. He was insanely grateful to have her in his life and was glad she had raised him, no matter how hard it was sometimes. The parents called their children to tell them some very important news, and that news was that their family would soon be bigger. The boys were eating at their table at that moment, and when they heard their parents' words, they did not immediately realize what they were talking about. Yuna was the first to realize what her parents were talking about and rushed to hug them, happy that she might have another sibling, and her mom confirmed her guess. Yunha sat unmoving at the table and bowed his head low, and his mother at this moment began to worry about her son's reaction. The boy suddenly raised his head, and in his eyes were tears of joy because he was very happy about the news and did not forget to thank his mother for it. Yunha tried to calm down and, sobbing, told his family that this was the best thing that happened to him after birth, and it was actually the best thing in his life. Dad, seeing his son's reaction to the news, chuckled and said that people might think he was the father. The whole family, upon hearing such a joke from their head of household, laughed, and they all rejoiced in their family idol. The time came, and one day the boy went to his kindergarten again. The girl who ran happily down the hall laughed and shouted that she was already there and asked if Yunha missed her. The boy was no longer Yunha, and according to the goddess's calendar, he was 2 years old in the dream and 7 years old in the ordinary one, and he imagined himself to be a dog. The girls encircled the boy and, stroking his head, thought they were soothing him and asked him why he was crying. They couldn't stop talking about what a good boy Yunha was, except that Yunha was trying to convince them that he wasn't crying at all. One of the girls on the sidelines suddenly didn't keep quiet anymore and said that she personally didn't understand why they thought Yunha was cute. The girl thought it was better to throw this mongrel away, but the boy was angry because Me always provoked him at the first opportunity. She threatened him that she would tell everything to the teacher for insulting her, and then the teacher would punish him. The teacher saw Yunha sleeping soundly and realized that he must have been dreaming. At this moment, Yunha was already getting a little angry because his teacher had thrown him into a cage of dangerous animals while he slept. One of the adults came back and entered the room, thus diverting the girls' attention to themselves, for they were very excited. Yunha, on the other hand, wanted to take advantage of this moment and tried to sneak out of the room without the girls noticing him. The boy walked into another classroom, and it was not empty. At the desk, Yunha saw Hyen, who was holding a book in her hands. Yunha asked what the girl was reading, and she said a book about Sherlock Holmes and added that she had been obsessed with him lately. The boy remembered and told the girl that in the memoirs about Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock and Professor Moriarty at the end fell from the waterfall and went to the other world. Hyen, hearing all this, stunned, froze, and looked with great surprise at the boy. Yunha realized his mistake, which made the girl look at him so surprised because he had accidentally made a spoiler for this memoir. Hyen was upset because she hadn't even finished reading it, and Yunha tried to apologize by telling her that he would be back in one piece in the next installment of Sherlock Holmes. The girl was even more upset and didn't want to hear it, so she shouted at him to stop talking about it or she wouldn't be interested in reading anymore. Yunha was sorry, but it was too late. Yunha decided to find another place to rest and went to another room where a group of guys had already gathered and were discussing something very heatedly. The boys formed a circle inside of which two led their duels, and one boy was defeated but indignantly said that everything was not fair and next time his rival would definitely get it from him. Yunha noticed the one he had wanted to get even with for a long time and said loudly for all the guys that he wanted to find out who was the strongest in their group and addressed Yunha personally, saying that he had come at the right time. The guys started to react very strongly and emotionally to all this because they also now wanted to be the strongest in their group. Yunha or Yunho himself thought about what all these guys were watching on TV, so they reacted like this. Yunho confidently drew his childish sword that he wanted to use in this duel and said menacingly that, in his opinion, this city was too small for the two of them. The boy added that everything would be decided here and now and told Yunha to take his weapon. While Yunha sighed heavily and thought about how he was fed up with all this, Yunho's friends were very supportive of their comrade and shouted that he was much stronger and wanted him to win with a single blow. But Yunha kept thinking only that they were still children. The comrades did not calm down and continued to shout at Yunho to win because they did not like the fact that Yunha was very popular with the girls. Yunha heard his neighbor calling him and thought that she might want to support him, but he was wrong because the girl was only rooting for him to lose. If you think about it, the boy should not expect anything else from her. He didn't think he needed anyone to support him, but he was still a little upset about it. Yunha noticed in the crowd that Hyen was also there and was already happy that she would probably support him and cheer for him in this duel. But Hyen did not hold back her emotions and, with tears in her eyes, shouted very loudly that because of what Yunha had done recently, she no longer liked him and was not going to support him at all. Yunha realized that he, as always, was alone in life and took his weapon in his hands, ready for this battle. Yunho did not hesitate and, confident in his victory, attacked to prove to everyone that there was no one stronger than him in their group. The boys held their baby swords as if they were in a real arena, and all far from games. Yunha was able to repel his opponent's attack without much difficulty with his sword, and Yunho himself lost his balance. Yunho tried his best to concentrate, but he didn't manage to stay on his feet for long, and catching his sword was much more problematic. The boy was unable to fight back Yunha and still fell to his knees, losing his battle weapon. Yunho clutched his stomach and couldn't and didn't want to believe it because he thought that he could still continue this battle. Only if he was able to use his closed powers, things would be different. The boy couldn't even stand on his knees and collapsed on the floor while the boys at this moment were shouting and cheering for Yunho's quick victory. Yunha, hearing all these shouts of joy and support for him, couldn't help but smile and said that it was basically a good fight for him. The guys did not calm down and continued to shout that the boy was very good and strong, and in principle they did not expect anything else from him. The girls also praised him because they liked how Yunha skillfully played when they all played together in the family. The boys were pushing the boy in the back and saying that they thought that if anyone could pull Excalibur, it would only be Yunha. But the boy didn't understand what they were talking about. The boys emotionally said that they never thought they could see someone raise Excalibur and believed only in Yunho. While the boy shyly looked at the sword in front of him, he thought that maybe he should do it after all. Yunha took hold of Excalibur's hilt and decided that since the boys were asking for it, he couldn't refuse them and disappoint them. He did so and drew his sword high above him, and the crowd at that moment applauded him wildly, and the guys couldn't help but cheer. The boys were shouting how strong Yunha was, how good he was for pulling out Excalibur, and the boy was even starting to feel a little proud of what he had done and shyly asked them to calm down. On the city street at this time, someone's phone was left under a streetlight, and there was not a single person around, and such emptiness was alarming. On the phone he had left, the online television news was broadcasting that there was an emergency in the city because of the 7th grade goblins who were trying to blend in with the crowd in crowded places. While all the news channels were reporting that if anyone could spot them, the authorities should be notified as soon as possible, the boys were running around on the playground, playing their games and not suspecting anything. The girls were having fun and happy to catch up with each other, touching and shouting whether they froze or the player melted and could continue the game. Yunha sat in the shade under a tree and watched them all as the boys ran one after another without stopping. The boy wondered if they were getting tired at all because he didn't have the energy for it. He decided to take advantage of the silence to accumulate mana because after changing the future, he needed to use every free second to do so. Yunha knew that it would be a little while before people would start to see more power in mana, and so it would be better for him if he could accumulate as much of it as possible. After that incident, he was already able to accumulate much more mana than he had before. The boys noticed Yunha and turned to him, asking if he had rested enough and urging him to join their game, shouting that he was now it. The boy himself never ceased to be amazed at their endurance. The teacher was able to distract all the kids and turn all the attention to himself, or rather to the ice cream he had brought and was going to give them all. Yunha watched the whole situation as one tried to outrun the other to get to the ice cream and thought about how they were all still kids. The teacher kept handing out ice cream to all the kids and said that if someone didn't have it yet, they should come to him and get it. While being handed out ice cream by the teacher, Yunha and Minnie took up the same thing at the same time and now looked at each other frozen. The kids started arguing about who they thought had taken the ice cream first, and no one was going to give in. The teacher came over to them and tried to understand what the problem was, but Minnie tried to argue that Yunha was a boy and had to give in to her, but the boy didn't agree. The teacher took the ice cream away from the boys and said what he had told them earlier so they wouldn't fight with their friends. Making a decision, the teacher did what he thought was best in this situation and broke their ice cream in half. He gave each of them half a piece and added that this was the end of their conflict because they could always share with each other. The kids decided unanimously that this outcome did not suit the two of them and began to play a game of rock, paper, scissors, and the one who wins in the end will get both halves. The teacher tried to calm them down and told them again that they should share and that it was the right thing to do. Hyan suddenly came up behind the teacher and wanted to ask him if he knew where Yunho was now, but he suggested that perhaps the boy was walking in the garden. Minnie was eating her half of an ice cream cone and talking in her ear about how she didn't doubt that Yunho was out there waving his sword. The only thing she didn't understand was why the boy always played by himself and almost never did it in the company of the boys. Yunha was sure that special training should always be done in secret, but Minnie, after hearing Hyan want to find and bring Yunho some ice cream, didn't understand why she was of the opinion that if the boy wanted it, he would come to her. Hyan still insisted on her own because she was sad that he was out there alone while they were all eating. Minnie laughed at Hyan's reasoning and said that her big flaw is that she's too cute. The teacher heard what the girls were talking about and asked if Hyan really wanted to bring Yunho his ice cream, to which the girl said yes. Minnie saw that Hyan was determined and offered to go with her, but the girl replied that there was no need and she would do it herself. The teacher also made an announcement to the kids that as soon as they were done with the ice cream, they should be sure to throw their trash in the designated area. Yunho, while he was sitting and finishing his half of ice cream, heard the kids calling for anyone who wanted to play the freezing game to come over. Minnie walked over to the boy and told him to come over too, but Yunha refused and added that he had enough games for today. The girl wasn't used to backing down and started to insist on her own, saying that if Yunha refused, then no one would play with him anymore. But the boy wasn't bothered at all, and Minnie replied that she shouldn't worry about it either. Minnie wasn't going anywhere without him and explained to Yunha that she had been personally asked by his older sister Yuna to play with him, and she wanted to fulfill that request. Yunha began to think about how nice and caring his older sister was, but his thoughts were interrupted by Minnie, who told him to get up immediately. The kids played among themselves to see who starts driving in this game, and that person turned out to be Yunha. Yunha didn't really like this outcome, but there was nowhere to go, and he ran to catch up with Minnie. The boy tried his best and wanted to catch up with the girl who was trying to run away. Yun's next target was a boy who was also running for all his might so that he couldn't be caught. Yun still managed to catch up with one, and he was able to touch the boy, and according to the rules of this game, he was now frozen and immobile until he was unfrozen. Afterwards, Yunha ran towards Minnie, and in a short time was able to run to her, touch her, and shout that she had already melted and could continue the game. Minnie didn't even have time to move from her seat before another boy ran up to her and was able to pass the baton. She was now it, which the boy reported to all the other players. But the girl herself was starting to get angry. Minnie naturally blamed Yunha for all of this and was going to direct her anger at him, but she had to catch up with him first. Yunha was already enjoying this game a lot, and with a grin on his face, he asked Minnie if she really thought she could catch up with him. The boy suddenly stopped, and that gave Minnie the opportunity to reach him and tell him that now he was it. But that was not what Yunha had in mind at that moment. After a moment, Yunha was completely enveloped in mana and was glowing with a bright blue glow, all because of the feeling of annihilation. But he did not understand how this was possible because he was in a kindergarten. What he saw next amazed him and surprised him very much, and it was a green monster paw with big sharp claws. Yunha took a closer look and became very angry, not yet fully believing that all this was really happening in a kindergarten. The kids who at that moment were playing on the playground also froze and with rounded eyes looked at the one who hovered over them, and most importantly, they did not know what it was above them. So far, on the other side of the fence stood a huge monster with its weapons, and it was a 7th grade goblin. The girl was so scared that she couldn't even move, and all she wanted was for her mom to come to her and take her to safety. The 7th grade goblin was already very close to her and, because of its size, blocked everything behind it. The monster did not hesitate any longer and decided to attack the girl with his weapon without any remorse. At the same moment, mana was released from the hand of one of the kids, and the most important thing in this situation was to make it in time and not be too late. With the help of mana released during the moment, Yunha managed to disarm the goblin and even a little disoriented because he did not expect such a thing. It was Yunha who used his power and released mana to help the girl escape this attack. The goblin quickly got out of the situation and shifted his focus to Yunha, trying to attack him while the boy dodged and shouted to the monster that he was fed up with them all. Yunha was determined as always when it came to monsters and thought that he would try to deal with it quickly and run to help the other kids. The boy and the monster were fighting one-on-one, and each wanted to get even with the other as soon as possible. The teacher at this moment did not stand aside and tried his best to cope with another monster because he had to provide safety for all the kids. He used the first thing that came to hand as his weapon, which was an ordinary broomstick, and tried to shout to Hyan to just stay in one place. The teacher threw his broom at the goblin, and such a picture actually made Yunha stagger in one place in surprise. Yunha, in a moment, was thrown to the teacher's shoulder, and they tried to carry him as far away as possible, and the same thing the teacher was doing to the girl who was grabbed by the arcing arm. All the teacher told them to do was to hold on as tightly as possible. The teacher tried to save the children, but the goblins themselves did not agree and chased him to destroy all of them. The goblin decided to catch up with them as soon as possible and rushed at them from behind in a leap with his weapon already quite close to the kids. Yunha decided to help the teacher and himself as well and once again applied his power, using mana. The boy tried to concentrate, though it was not easy to do so in a hurry, but he did not intend to give up so easily and quickly in front of the monsters. Yunha was still able to accomplish what he had planned, and thanks to the boy's strength, the monster was pushed as far away from them as possible. The boy breathed a sigh of relief at his success, and it was good that the teacher hadn't noticed any manipulation on his part, but was still running forward to find a place to hide. Yunha had already entered the room on his own feet, but the teacher continued to carry the very frightened girl who was even afraid to open her eyes. The teacher, having finally reached a place where they could all take shelter, fell to the floor and began to complain to the director of the kindergarten, while the girl was trying to calm down from the incident she had seen. Despite his fatigue, he still asked the director what happened to the other children, but the woman assured him that all the others had already been evacuated and were in a relatively safe place. Yunha heard the adults talking about how these were actually 7th grade goblins, of which there were 2, and that they had most likely appeared a few days ago. All this information was passed on to the authorities, and now it was necessary to wait for the players who could sort it all out.